All right. Okay. So I'm gonna interview Elliot Yang. This is my guy. He is a beast. What I need to do, this is my thought, is I wanted to get a little sound effect that was a lion's roar. And then every time I interviewed a really good player, I could be like, this person is a beast, and it would go, roar.
Yeah, as long as I don't have to make the sound.
No, you don't have to make the sound.
Okay.
We'll have it all ready for you. You don't have to do anything but dispense knowledge.
That sounds good. I mean, I already make enough sounds.
That's true. Enough weird, awesome, amazing sounds. And here's the thing: is that Elliot is a good friend of mine, and he's also an incredible performer. And every time I talk to him, it's a really interesting conversation. So I wanted to snag you here while we're kind of rehearsing for the weekend, and we just finished a nice little run through of some ideas with some music that he's going to be playing. And so now I get to just ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
So wherever those go, and to whatever extent you want to answer them, whatever strikes your fancy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. So, okay, so first of all, in any way that you want to answer the question, can you explain your dissertation project and give some highlights? Because I really think this project is awesome, and not many people have done it. And others have pointed out how it's kind of unusual, the work that you've been doing. So.
Yeah. So the project is just a commissioning project, and sitting around in quarantine, I wanted to create something during that time because we had spent so much time, social distancing, and making music together was impossible. So we made a lot of layered recordings, which if you're in orchestra or in school, that was something that was our best form of making chamber music at the time. And I felt sort of inspired by that experience to have new works for cello, for solo cello. It seemed apt. And I think I had been I'd spent a lot of time recording and also performing works for solo cello during that time, including Kodai Sonata, Casado Suite, the Bach Suites. And I think it was only natural to want to record for just for the instrument. So that's kind of where the idea came from. A lot of it was actually inspired by Kodai Sonata, because there's a lot of scholarly sources discussing how Kodai's music is rooted in Hungarian folk music, and specifically Hungarian folk lament. And I think that seemed really apt for the time that we were going through, especially with cases rising. And when I contacted you and the other two composers in January of 2022, that's actually when the cases were at their all-time high. So you just read on the news that there's over 1 million cases today, and some days it was about 800,000, and then of course those are just reported cases, so of course it'd be higher, but it seemed impossible to ignore. So I kind of figured I can either sit here and kind of stay in my home and just worry about it, or I can actually be part of, make something that's expressive of what we're going through. So that's really where the urge and inspiration for the project came from. So I could go more into it with Kodai, but I think that's sort of where the genesis of the project stemmed from, and that's actually why I played Kodai for you in our first meetings.
I do remember that, and you're like, hey, look at all these different things that the cello can do.
Right.
The cello can operate as much more than just a monodic instrument.
Right.
You've got all kinds of options. And what are some of the things in that, really quick, just as a quick tangent in that sonata that stuck out to you as, hey, this is cool. Maybe I can show some composers some things that they might not be thinking about.
Yeah, so Kodai Sonata was written in 1915 in response to the First World War. But coincidentally, what followed immediately after was the Spanish flu, World War One, and there's a ton of music written for cello actually during this time. In response to World War One, but not a whole lot of music written in response to the pandemic that followed. So it's known. Some scholars have called that Spanish flu America's forgotten pandemic, because it came. It was extremely lethal and extremely contagious.
It was.
But it had a surprisingly little effect on kind of the staying power in people's minds, and even epidemiologists at the time, they chose not to really dwell on it, which I find interesting. Because I've been reading a book by Gina Colada, author for the New York Times, and she wrote a book called Flu, and it sort of delves into explorations of, okay, well, why were these experts, these epidemiologists, why were they so hesitant to talk about it? And I think that's really interesting. So that's also kind of a reason why I wanted to go into this project. But to answer your question on Kodai specifically, I think it being inspired by Hungarian folk lament, I think also known as dirges. What's fascinating about them is Kodai actually published a book on Hungarian folk music, and Kodai himself actually talks in that book, and then he has a chapter on dirges, on laments, and says that they were very private people, Hungarians at that time, the turn of the century, and these dirges were often performed by women, and if there was an outsider, if they noticed an outsider, they'd stop singing immediately. It was very interesting.
Wow.
Right? But I think the sonata, right, has a lot of ties with the Hungarian language, with the prose and recitative style. It's known as parlando rubato, specifically, which I'm sure you've heard about in the past. But a lot of Kodai's music at the time, Opus 7 and Kodai Sonata's Opus 8. I mean, there's the duo for violin and cello. There's the sonata for cello and piano, Opus 4. But a lot of the dissertation kind of revolves around looking into these works, and also just the nature of the lament of Kodai's sonata. And I felt that this kind of music was really fitting for this project. So it features a lot of polyphony, the sonata, a lot of left-hand pizzicato, and specifically second movement of the sonata was really I think that's what I played for you, actually. Second movement of the Kodai sonata, and it's really just this prose recitative of a dirge, basically, like a woman singing with a pizzicato, sort of like a drum. So there is that polyphony that's sort of in play in that sonata. So not only did the music speak to me, it's very powerful music, very honest music, but there's something about it. Kodai, I'm paraphrasing, but Kodai talks about how Hungarian music is not, it's not full of emotion for sake of emotion, but it's really, there's a will behind the music. It's very strong. I don't know the exact quote. I mean, I can pull it up for you, but I'm paraphrasing it. But I found that there's something very strong in that music, in the face of adversity and in the face of extreme trauma, right?
So there's a purpose and an authenticity
there is
behind the emotion that you hear in music.
Right. So I felt that was really interesting. I did not read about that actually before our meetings, but something about that music spoke to me. But then after reading his description of the lament, then that kind of solidified and reinforced what the music had already spoken to me.
That's fascinating.
I think it's really something. So it's also worth noting that the sonata by Kodai is the first, I guess, work of its kind, right? Of course, there's a famous quote of Bartok, who is good friends with Kodai, and Bartok said, "There's no, there hasn't really been a work written like this, right?
Wow.
Since the Bach suites, 200 years earlier, right? So it's a monumental work for cellists, and I think, and for good reason. For good reason. There's a whole bunch of techniques in that piece: left hand pizzicato, the harmonics,
yes,
with exploring the partials, and just virtuosic playing, right? I think it's really something that's powerful music, but also really explores what the cello can do. So I think that was a big reason why I played that for you. And even the Casado, right? Even the Casado suite, it was inspired by Kodai. He actually quotes Kodai quite a bit.
Oh wow, okay.
In the work, so it's hugely monumental work for the instrument.
And it was compared to the Bach cello suites because Bach had a lot of innovations that were innovations for their time in the way that he used the cello.
Yeah.
And not just going back to the idea of not just using it as a monodic instrument, but how can it kind of accompany itself? How can it present polyphonic, like chorale type movements on a four-stringed instrument that uses one bow? What are all the modes of playing that you can have in a cello? That's really cool. And one thing that you said a couple minutes ago that's so crazy, that I find so crazy, is going back to the Hungarian like performance practice, is that they would stop performing the music if like an outsider came by or something like that. That is so, I don't know how to describe that. Metal, hipster, you probably wouldn't even know what I'm doing here. I don't know how to describe that. That's so interesting. It's going to take me a long time to get my head around it, because that's so different from the way that we think of performance practice. Is if somebody joins in on a recital, listening in, it's like, hey, awesome, the more the merrier. But that kind of connects to that idea of authenticity and purpose in such a really profound way. That's pretty inspirational.
I mean, I think it shows how Kodai mentions it, how private they were as a people, and Kodai was known because for going out to the Hungarian countryside, and he would record. He had a phonograph machine, and he would record folk music. So he has he had collections. So you can find these on streaming services, and there's albums that have been released where it's just collections of folk songs that he recorded. And when recording the music, he talks about how the singer would it's parlando rubato, right? So a lot of this is improvised.
Okay.
So it's known for its sort of improvisatory nature, right? Which I find so compelling. But she would sing. He talks about this in the book, in his folk music book, that the singer would sing an excerpt, and then Kodai would hear it, and then he would record it, and then she would sing it again, but it would be different from the first time. And Kodai, he kind of mentions, it was never really as good as the first time, but there's something about it that the improvisatory nature of singing, and it's just it's speaking, right?
Wow.
So I think yeah, I think that's interesting because it shows that the music, the folk music, is very authentic, and I really think that he was writing from a place of, what he heard as opposed to what was recorded. Right? So.
What he apprehended as far as the overall tradition and the listening experiences that he had all together. Would you say that?
Can you say that one more time?
Like you were saying, he wasn't like necessarily dictating recordings or anything like that, but he was writing based on what he heard,
right,
instead of what he dictated.
Right.
So I'm thinking maybe he's recalling the entire experience, and not just the individual notes or individual melodies.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. So
fascinating. That is so cool. Okay, so this is kind of unique how you're diving into this Kodai sonata and you're wanting this to sort of be the fuel that you're sharing with composers to write. Like, hey, I invite you to be like Kodai, who created all these other really interesting things that the cello could do. And one thing that I thought was the most unique feature of your recent work is how closely you work with all these composers. As one of your advisors said, it's not normal the extent to which you communicated with composers and worked with them back and forth. And I can say that too. Like, my experience working with you has not been typical. There's a few other really amazing performers that I've worked with very closely, but this experience is up there as far as the close communication and the things that we've been able to achieve together. And so I want to ask you, like, what your general experiences are in communicating with composers and some lessons you've learned. Like, what has been very difficult and what has been very efficient, what's been rewarding, what's been frustrating, any one of those that you want to take a stab at.
Let's see. Very few things have been frustrating.
That's good.
Which I think is good. I understand. I went in understanding that it's a process. That you're not gonna. That there's a first draft for a reason, right? And those are opportunities to talk about what works well, and also, to make recommendations on what's more idiomatic, right? Because, well, all the composers that I've worked with, none of them have been cellists, right?
Right.
So that's important to keep in mind, and giving them that feedback is huge. So there's no need to suffer needlessly on your instrument.
Instead, communicate.
Right. And I think I try to keep the intention of the composer as much as I can. Okay. So I really give everything a good, honest try. When I first get the music, I try not to change anything, because I trust what the composer's written. That being said, if after I've done that and something still isn't quite convincing, whether they bring it up or whether it's not convincing to myself, then I'll try different things, right? I'll try it an octave lower. I'll try it. I'll maybe, play an octave higher or something like that, and then just make little changes and then see how that goes, and then also sort of report my findings to the composer, and usually they take it well.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that too.
So like I said, very few very negative experiences with giving feedback. In my experience, it's quite the opposite. They love it.
That's awesome. And I've loved it too. And I don't feel like you've really changed anything that I've written. We've just found sort of slightly different ways to do it. Or
sure.
The thing that gets me about this whole experience, which I was saying this earlier, but I'll say it again, it's being recorded, is that there are things that we get out of our interactions that are impossible otherwise. It's impossible. Because, like, I started I'm not a cellist. I even have a cello that I can goof around with, and try out different things. But, and I started learning about the cello in my undergrad, which was a long time ago, 15 to 20 years ago. But there is always details that are impossible that make a huge difference in the way that a piece sounds. Like we were just talking about you know, how to fade into a harmonic and get a smooth, a gradated transition between open string and harmonic and back that isn't binary, that isn't just popping in and out. And the factors that went into it were bow angle, bow speed, pads of fingers versus tips of fingers,
Yep.
and subtle finger movements where you're rocking your finger on and off. And I would have never known this because my closest analogy is the guitar. And when I'm playing that, I'm playing a string, and all I have to do is like slowly lower the pad of my finger down. But that doesn't work, even though we both have string instruments that are at least in the same general solar system as far as instrument construction goes. And there are things so that's just an example of how there are things that I would have never known. I would have never known how to express. And even you said that even you weren't sure about how to do certain things until we were talking together.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have to learn by doing. You have to try things that might not work. But I think that's really rehearsal at its core, right? It's being curious enough to try this way or try that way. You know, it's not just about, okay, we have to get this together. Like if you're in a traditional rehearsal sense, like we have to make sure that this passage is together and then this one's in tune. And of course, those are all given. But I think one of the most important things that you can be as a musician is to be curious. And you know, what about this? What if we did it this way? You know, you're finding new things, whether it's you find it in the score, like new things that you haven't discovered. But I think constantly changing how something could be, right? Is what keeps it interesting and keeps it fresh. So that way, you know, each time you rehearse or each time you meet or each performance, it's different. So I think that's huge. So I think just being curious and staying curious as a performer, and well, from my experience, I think that's been very rewarding.
That's awesome. So don't suffer needlessly. So first, you first try things as a performer, and then if it doesn't work, you talk to the composer about it.
I mean, they're alive. You can talk to them. I mean, it's not. That's why I like new music so much, because you get this opportunity to you know, ask them, because so much of the music that we play, right? They're composers. We kind of have to play detective and say, okay, maybe he meant this, or maybe he meant this, right? But you know, but you can ask.
That's lovely, and I think that from the composer side, any composer will tell you that, like, when you approach the piece with the respect of having tried literally what's on the page first and tried it many different ways, that gives you so much more credibility when you come to the composer with a different idea or a different suggestion, or maybe move it down an octave or change the fingering. Like, listen, I've already tried this, you know, many times, but I think, wouldn't it get the effect that you want if we just did this? And I think that's probably why you've had such a positive response from all the composers that you're working with, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think you have to really be enthusiastic about their music. And that's, I think that's a secret. That's a secret to, it's a secret to teaching well. The more enthusiasm you have, and not like manufactured enthusiasm, but like actually genuinely interested and excited, right? Curious, like all these words that we use to describe. I think that's really the secret. And if you have that curiosity and you've really getting back to working with composers, I think if you show that level of enthusiasm and really trusting them in their vision, then, you know, these little things that you work on and you think about, and of course you have to spend time with the score and you have to spend time practicing, that, you know, but that shows, right? And that's really what is convincing to the composer. So I think that's I agree. That's why oftentimes there's a positive response if they see the effort behind your hard work.
Absolutely. So the 2 life lessons are so far, we've got the don't suffer needlessly, but come with curiosity and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So that's the balance there. And I think that you put a really nice positive perspective on both of those things. That it's not a battle or a struggle or an issue of what idea is going to dominate.
Right. It's a conversation.
Yeah, there you go.
It's not an argument.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So yeah, I think that's very important to have that kind of mentality. You are collaborating. You're trying to achieve the same thing.
Yes.
So that's huge.
And just to give you a little more encouragement, actually, I don't think I've told you this, or maybe I did a while ago, but like as a composer, it can be hard or awkward if you're not used to interacting with performers in whatever you want to call it, coaching them or working through an idea with them and being respectful but outspoken about what you want to achieve as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the enthusiasm that you have brought, I have personally found very encouraging.
Oh, great.
Yes,
Thank you.
and you've helped my development in terms of being able to work with performers. I noticed that after our interactions, I felt a lot more natural in talking to all kinds of performers. When before, I had some okay moments, but then I also had moments where I would feel very awkward and I don't want to come across as like pompous or ignorant or this or that, and then, working with you has really helped me to move through that. So I think you've really, and I'm sure that it's been the same experience for the other composers that you work with. So you've really helped us too, maybe not even realized it. So,
Oh, thanks. That's very kind of you to say.
I appreciate it, man. So, okay, so moving from that, and what kinds of tips would you give a composer, whether they're more experienced or a young undergrad, in approaching another instrument? You could talk specifically about yours if you like, and approaching writing for the instrument and communicating with a performer.
I think do your homework in advance as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the instrument is, try to listen to pieces in the repertoire that are considered standard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a Google search away.
Right.
And just listen to some pieces and look at, if you can, get your hands on the scores for those pieces. A lot of stuff is available online these days. IMSLP, which might not be around in, I don't know, 10 years, I don't know, but it's a resource, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think just become as well versed as you can in the instrument and try to learn as much as you can about what's been written. Watch performances. Of course you'll never know the instrument as well as the performer will.
Right.
And I don't think they expect you to. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think I would say just try to get a sense of what's possible for the instrument, and also don't hesitate to ask questions when you're there, right? Because oftentimes if you're if the composer is very excited, which they probably are for their work, for their own work, but that's huge. That's contagious with performers. If they see that you are again curious to know different things, like how can this be improved? I'm looking for this kind of expression in this passage or in this piece. And do you have any recommendations on how I can achieve that, or do you feel like this is doing that? So I think it's also remembering that they are musicians too, and their input is huge. So I think have a very clear vision for what you want, and don't be afraid to say that. But also, do your homework in advance, and understand that, it's a process.
So almost the inverse on the composer side, like the composer respects it when the performer has done their homework and woodshedded a
Right.
passage and then has something
Yeah.
to contribute to the conversation.
Right. But I think it goes both ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, so the inverse would be that the composer's also done their homework in researching the instrument, not just reading the orchestration book, which is a good thing to do. You should read the orchestration book, but just that's a starting point.
Yeah.
And you should listen and watch lots and lots and lots before you first put pen to paper and spend a lot of time thinking about the instrument, sort of collecting techniques maybe in your mind on what is possible.
Yeah.
So the way that let me check something with you, because I think that what you're saying is similar to how I sometimes think of it. Is there's sort of, in my mind, there's three components. You should brush up on what you know the instrument can do. You should use your imagination, sort of extending what you know it can do to what you think it might be able to do, and then hold that loosely, and then spend time talking with the performer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does that sound?
Yeah, I think so. And I would, add to that, like a practical way of doing that might be to, when you listen or watch a video of someone performing, then you can say, I'm really, inspired by this. I'm really inspired by what they did there. Can you show me how that's done? That's a very specific example. And, maybe they played it. Maybe they've performed that piece.
Right.
And then they'll be, oh yeah, it's just this, or whatever. I don't know why I did that, but you're a guitarist, so but you know what I mean? So it's the more that you come prepared and the more specific your questions are, I think the better.
Excellent. That's really great. Well, this is the kind of stuff that I wish that I would have had to go back and listen to many times when I was an undergrad. I had some really great teachers too, and that was extremely helpful. And they said some things that are along the lines, but I think for somebody to hear it from the mouth of a performer too, who's had a lot of experience working with composers, it's just more reinforcement in how to approach these things. And it's just amazing how many little details there are on any instrument, and I always encounter that. And so the whole exchange between composers and performers fascinates me. So the last thing that I wanted to ask you is what your sort of professional plans are, and how does new music fit into that, and how do you approach new music? How do you feel about it right now? Are you sick of new music? Do you love new music even more? What do you want to do with new music in the future? And how does that fit with your overall professional plan? Because you're getting ready to graduate with your doctorate. You're going to be Dr. Yang very soon, which is very exciting. And do you have a specific plan, or are you just going to see how things unfold? Or what are your thoughts?
I think new music will always obviously will continue to evolve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think understanding that it's not something that is either right or wrong. That's sort of a incorrect way of looking at it. But again, being curious and saying what it could be,
Mm-hmm.
right? And is it something that that speaks to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And something that you find compelling. I think that's really what excites me about new music. So I love new music.
Awesome. That's good. That's good for new music.
I really think again, the enthusiasm that you bring to it, that will show in the performance. And I think the attention to the little details like that, and curiosity will make people believers in new music. So I think the future is bright for
Excellent.
any new compositions. So as
So-
long as there are people who are willing to perform them, and
Yeah.
no, but I think there's quite a few. There's a lot. Yeah.
You know what? It is kind of true. Like, depending on where you live and that kind of thing. That's part of why I asked you the question. Is I've said this to a lot of people, but I feel like the Valley, the Phoenix area, has so much potential and possibility when it comes to new music. There's so many talented players here, and there's a lot of composers, and we just need more communication and more interaction and that kind of thing. But so what you're saying is it's the curiosity and the potential of new music is one of the things that you find really exciting about it.
Yeah.
Is that
like
fair?
Where it can go.
Yeah.
So, the whole commission idea, right? It was just an idea that
Right.
popped into my head, and then I just made the decision. Yeah, let's just do it. I think it'll be fun.
That's awesome.
So it's commissioning is something that I've always wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
but I always thought, oh, maybe like in 5 years, or oh, maybe like when when I'm ready to do that. No, it just went for it, and I think, as you say, there's so many composers here,
Right.
in the Phoenix area alone,
Mhm.
and so many performers,
Right.
and everyone's wondering, oh, what I wish I had more connections, or I wish I did this, but no, I mean you have a lot of opportunities.
Oh yeah.
So I think if people just reached out and they went for it, like you can make your own opportunities. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I think having a meditated sort of trajectory for your career, especially in something in music, something in a career in music, I think that's very limiting. So I think it's great if you have dreams and you say, oh, I want to be an orchestral musician, because I did orchestra auditions for a few years, right? And then I've also been subbing with Phoenix Symphony for the past 5 years.
Oh, cool.
And it's been really great. I mean, it's awesome. But I think just having your options open and not saying this is the only way, right?
Right.
That I think a lot of musicians kind of get these pigeonholed. They get stuck on just like this is the singular focus. Like I have to achieve this, right?
Yes.
And then when they don't achieve it, then they think, oh, I failed, or this kind of thing. But I think that's a very dangerous kind of way of thinking, and understanding that you can create opportunities for yourself in music. There's a lot of different things that you can do. You can teach. You can teach at a college, like you're doing now. You can form your own studio, start your own business like that.
Gigs.
Yeah, gigs. And I think just try to make as many connections as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
That's huge, because the type of character that you have, and in addition to playing well, right? But I think be someone that others want to play with, that others want to collaborate with, right? So I think if you take that initiative, right, to be the best colleague that you possibly can be, then you'll find opportunities.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like, when you and I were young, maybe we both were used to hearing about, people older than us saying, what'll happen is you'll grow up, you'll get a degree, you'll find a job, you'll work that job for a while, you'll move up the ladder, and then you'll retire. And the problem with that is, if you limit yourself, if you pigeonhole yourself to, I'm going to find a job, and that's going to be the job.
Or I'm going to win a job.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
And you're not open to thinking about, just the incredibly broad range of activities you could, partake in as a musician, then that's the only way that you can fail, in my opinion. If you keep looking for opportunities, you'll find all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah.
I fully agree.
And just apply to like everything you possibly can.
Yeah.
Of course, things that you want to do,
Right.
Not just things that you have to do to survive,
Yes.
right? So
You should have a blend.
right. I think it's important to have a mix of things because you know you'll find the opportunities and the doors will open.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you work hard and you really bring good enthusiasm and have good character, I think people will want to work with you. So that's huge. So you make your own opportunities that way.
Absolutely. And if you have a good character, like you said, that goes so far, and you shouldn't be afraid of, and this is a part of the character thing, you shouldn't be afraid of if the question comes up of, okay, but I also have to make a living, so how are we going to settle this financially? That can be a part of it, but that's not something that you should be intimidated by. That's just all a part of working things out and being amicable, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really important skill.
Yeah,
That's really
absolutely. And I think again, don't forget why you chose to become a musician in the first place. I had a moment in my youth symphony where we played Beethoven 5 with Milwaukee Youth Symphony, and look, it wasn't a perfect performance, right? There were mistakes that were made, of course, but that didn't really matter. I just loved what I was doing. I think for the first time, never before. And then it was that moment where I just thought, okay, yeah, I have to do this.
That's so awesome.
I have to do this with my life. It's just, and I think that's really the power of music, right? And really loving what you do. So I think don't forget that. When that's what I'm hoping happens with the students that I have, right? I hope that they have a moment where they get it, and that's why I try to push every single one of my students to be in some kind of youth symphony, right? Because it was life changing for me.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a conversation with my teacher at the time, and then we were talking about whether music was an option for me, and I wanted him to be really honest, and then he just asked me, well, can you see yourself doing anything else? I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds and said no.
Wow.
And I still feel that way, and even more so.
That's wonderful.
So, yeah, I think I can't really put it better than that. So I think ask yourself that question: is there anything else that you'd rather be doing? Realistically, are you just doing it to survive? Just to or is it something that you'll really be rewarded? Is it really rewarding for you? And I think if it is truly rewarding for you, then you'll find a way.
Okay.
So of course you still have to do your due diligence and apply to things and apply yourself and apply for positions and whatnot. But that enthusiasm is really the secret. Because there's so many kids that I realize they would love to have cello lessons. They would dream to do that.
Right.
And then and I actually didn't I didn't choose really to play the cello. It was just kind of my parents just kind of gave me one when I was 6 years old, and I didn't really love it until later on in high school, and then I realized, oh, this is pretty cool.
Oh wow.
So it takes a while sometimes, but I think if you stick with it and you're persistent, then you can kind of find what you love, and yeah, you should do what you love, basically.
That is fabulous and a perfect place to end our conversation. I think that is awesome. Elliot also has incredible pedagogical insights with his instrument and in general that is fascinating. But maybe I'll bother him in a handful of months or something with something like that. We could have another conversation because I was utterly fascinated earlier by that. But I love how your passion has come through in this conversation, and I've really enjoyed working with you, and I know that whoever does work with you in the future will also enjoy that. So,
Thanks.
yeah, thank you very much for talking with me, man.
Thank you.
That was awesome. All right, super cool.